So
the
we got
next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
3 in a row.
Oh, good.
All right. Hey, Marty, how are you? Hey, Jan.
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Andy.
Good evening.
Yes.
Jan, there's a light over to your right or
I know,
left.
I see that. Let me turn that light off.
Yeah.
Andy, I have your schedule in front. It says not 3 in a row. It's,
Okay, then I'm wrong.
according to this, you skipped the 15th of December.
Okay, I'm wrong. 15th of December, we're off. Thank
Correct.
you.
It goes to, it's the 22nd is the last one.
From 1/8
Thank you.
22.
Yep. All right, my bad. Thank you for looking at that, Ruth. I appreciate it. Yeah, because we have a makeup class next week.
Yeah.
Hello, Zinbargs. How are you? Hello, Lynn. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Terrific.
Signing up for next year, next semester, Andy.
All right, you're going to sign up for next semester? Great.
Yeah, we
Right.
gotta send a check in.
Okay,
How much
great.
is my check? 47, 49, what is it?
47.
47, okay,
47.
Yeah, 47.
all right, I'll
And-
send in a check tomorrow.
All right. And we're good there. And let's see. Jan, are you going to be signing up again?
I don't know yet. I might have a conflict. There may be something else I want to do on Tuesday nights. So
Okay. Okay.
we shall see.
Andy, how much is
I
the
also-
semester for single? How much is for the one semester, for the semester?
47.
Okay.
47. Lynn?
Andy, what are we discussing next
I'm going to
semester?
get back
Move over
to you
here.
on that.
Try.
I'm sorry, Lynn, I couldn't hear you one more time, please.
I'm going to get back to you on that. I also have to look at my schedule.
Okay. All right.
Andy, what are we discussing next semester?
Well, a lot of different topics. I don't have it all mapped out yet. But with that being said, what would you like me to include?
I don't know. You always figure out something
Okay.
interesting.
Thank you.
I mean, after 4 years, you haven't repeated very much.
6 years.
To get it from
Was
you.
it 6 already? All right.
Yeah. 6
I
years.
lost track. You're right. It's definitely more than 4.
Yeah, it's 6 years. We're in our 6th year. All right. Well, I know some people contacted me in advance that they're not going to be here, so we are going to begin for those that are here. And welcome back. So actually, we're going to do about 4 or 5 different things tonight. And to Carolyn's point, for those that have been here for 6 years, on occasion we do cover Thanksgiving. But I'm not going to go into a whole Thanksgiving thing. But what I will begin with is there might be some things you might not know about Thanksgiving. So how often has somebody come to you and asked you, do Jews celebrate Thanksgiving? Has anybody ever come to you and asked you, do Jews celebrate
No.
Thanksgiving?
No, not
I know
me.
many don't.
Really? Wow. Okay. Well, I've been approached many times. Maybe, oh, I know why. Okay, I know why. Because you guys have lived either in New York, New Jersey, or South Florida, so you don't know many non-Jews. That's why. But when I lived in Manchester, New Hampshire, or Omaha, Nebraska, even though we had 8,000 Jews, that's where I always used to get the question, do Jews celebrate Thanksgiving? Well, I have an answer in case anybody asks you. Not only do we celebrate Thanksgiving, but believe it or not, even though it is not written in the Torah, even though it is not written in the book of Proverbs, Thanksgiving has its roots in Judaism. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, wait a minute, I didn't hear any rabbi talking about this. It's not in any of the books, but it happens to be factual. Why? Because,
Over here.
Gene, okay, you okay, Gene? Because if you want to chat, that's okay. I got to mute you. Okay. So,
all right.
So with that being said, the Puritans, when they came over, guess what? They knew more about Judaism than the average American Jew knows today. They knew about the Torah. They knew about the Talmud. Many of them, by the way, spoke Hebrew. And one of the things that the Puritans really came over for, as we know, is religious freedom. And they studied the Torah in biblical Hebrew. And I think I mentioned once this year that when we're talking about the American Judaism on the American influence based on Judaism, that Hebrew was one of the two languages that was going to be considered as the official language of the United States. And way back when, the Massachusetts colony governor, a fellow by the name of John Winthrop, way back when said the following: "We shall find the God of Israel is among us. But," and this guy's not Jewish, if we deal falsely with our God, we be consumed out of the good land whither we are going." And that language echoes the Torah and the warnings that God gave us in the Torah. And of course, we know that Judaism is filled with daily prayers of thanks and thanksgiving. And for those that are not familiar, we're supposed to say a bracha 100 times a day. 100 times a day. And that is based on everything. And the Puritans know that. And the Puritans were familiar with a very famous or infamous Jewish holiday called Sukkot. And the story is that the very first Thanksgiving was based on Proverb 100, which tells the Jewish people to give thanksgiving for all they have. And the Puritans developed Thanksgiving meal the first time based on our holiday of Sukkot, which is in fact a harvest holiday. And when you combine all of that and the fact that in Deuteronomy it says that after we eat, we're supposed to give thanks to God, where do you think and of course we say the prayer Hamotzi before we eat, that's where people think that many of the traditions that we have on the Thanksgiving table actually come from. So that's a Reader's Digest version of how Judaism impacted the American celebration of the non-religious holiday of Thanksgiving. Did you know that?
Yes, we did.
All right, I got one few. Okay, not everybody. Okay, so now that we know that, the next time somebody says, or if anybody says to you, do Jews celebrate Thanksgiving? You can say, yeah, it's as much a part of our heritage as it is yours. And I think that would be a very appropriate answer. Lynn?
Do Orthodox Hasidic people celebrate Thanksgiving?
No.
I didn't think so.
Some do.
Erwin,
yeah.
why do you say no, Erwin?
Because was involved in these organizations. They only celebrate Jewish holidays. Not all.
Not all. Okay, yeah, because there are many that do, but yeah, I'll agree with you that not all, because some of them look at it, well, but there's a conflict there. Why? Because one of the things the Torah tells us to do is to honor the non-religious traditions of the country that we're in. But on the other hand, it also says that we should not be involved in the pagan rituals of the countries that we're in. And there are some that might suggest, even though I don't think there's any evidence behind it, that Thanksgiving is in fact a religious holiday for the non-Jews, which in fact it isn't. So conservative, reform, and I would say that most Orthodox, which I think is a safe thing to say, most Orthodox do celebrate Thanksgiving. So that would be that's a little bit of a background on Thanksgiving. And of course, I told this story about the turkey before, how the turkey got its name. I think I did that recently. So I'm not going to review that again because I think most of us know that. All right. So let me cover a whole different topic, but I wanted to make sure just to throw that in. Let's talk about the Hebrew language. The Hebrew spoken language today is the official language of Israel. And of course, many Jews, not all, speak Hebrew as a spoken language. So the question that I have is for those that might know, and that is, at what year did Hebrew become the official spoken language of Israel, considering how long Israel has been around, either as a captured state or as an independent state? Anybody want to take a guess? Go ahead, Mark.
48.
48. Okay. Anybody else? Jan?
I think it might be before that. I think it was in the early 1900s.
Early 1900s. Alan?
I'm going to say the 1920s.
1920s. Anybody else?
1917, I believe.
1917.
Qualifying, you said the official language of Israel or spoken language.
The official language.
Then that's 48.
I
48.
think 48.
48. Okay. And so I'm going to show you a video that I normally don't do videos, but I found a whole series of videos that I think are going to be really special and really good, that each and every one of us can learn something from instead of me babbling. So this is a video called The History and Revival of the Hebrew Language. I think you'll find this exceptionally interesting, and then we'll discuss it. And I want to make sure I turn the sound off before I do that. Hold on. Before I do that, I want to make sure I turn the sound off the screen share, because sometimes I forget to do that, and that's exactly what I did. So here we go.
Came back.
Yeah, but where's the sound? There it is.
Sure, the Bible, prayers, and religious texts were written and read in Hebrew, but nobody spoke it in real life. So how did an almost extinct biblical language become the mother tongue of world Jewry in the span of only a few decades, something that had never happened in the history of language? And what role did a radical linguistic revolutionary named Eliezer ben Yehuda play in the miraculous rebirth of Hebrew? Let's go back, like way back. In the Bible, the Jews, otherwise known as Hebrews, spoke an ancient, well, more biblical version of Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew remained the native tongue of Jews for over 1,000 years. But Hebrew, as a spoken language, began to die out around the year 70. That's the year the Romans destroyed the second Jewish temple in Jerusalem and exiled a vast number of Jewish people from Israel.
So did you know that back in 70, as he just described, way back when, Hebrew stopped becoming a spoken language amongst the Jews? Whoa.
And Hebrew, as a spoken language, really kicked the bucket about 65 years later in 135 after the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, when Roman Emperor Hadrian expelled, enslaved, or killed most of Israel's remaining Jews, the final native Hebrew speakers. So that should have been the end of Hebrew, right? Well, no. Hebrew as a spoken language was dead, but the few Jews left in Israel continued using Hebrew in the study of Torah, but, and this is key, they only used it as a written, literary language. According to Louis Glinner in his book, The Story of Hebrew, reading Hebrew became a sort of spiritual resistance by Jews against their Roman oppressors. By the turn of the 2nd century, Aramaic had become the commonly used language of the Middle East, but Hebrew as a written language for Torah study still persisted. And at the turn of the 3rd century, Rabbi Judah the Prince, then the leader of the small remaining Israeli Jewish community, was determined to give written Hebrew an even better shot at survival. He decided that he would exclusively use Hebrew in his editing of the Mishnah, the compilation of Jewish law, and the basis for the Talmud. His very deliberate choice to codify Hebrew as the language of the Mishnah kept written Hebrew alive. But by the 6th century, Hebrew's use for Torah study was very limited. This is when the Talmud, the encyclopedic work forming the basis of all Jewish law, was composed. It was a whopping 5,400 or so pages, in mostly Aramaic. Still though, Hebrew held on. Medieval scholars wrote their commentaries on the Bible and Talmud in Hebrew, from Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, or Rashi, in France, to Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra in Spain. Maimonides, the 12th century leader of the Jewish community in Egypt, wrote his Mishnah Torah, or Code of Law, in Hebrew, covering every detail of Jewish observance.
But remember, at this point, Hebrew was no longer a spoken language for daily use, just biblical and religious and spiritual.
Okay, we've got the ancient and medieval history covered, so it's time to talk about Eliezer ben Yehuda, who resurrected Hebrew as a spoken language in its modern form, right? Not so fast. The revival of Hebrew as a modern language actually started well before his time, with one period often overlooked. The 18th century saw the Age of Enlightenment, during which the study of language rose in popularity, and Hebrew is no exception. In fact, many Christians obsessed over Hebrew, regarding it as a classical language akin to Latin, as you can see from some of the emblems of Ivy League schools.
These are the Ivy League schools, and some of them you recognize. And here, of course, is Hashem, El Shaddai, and the words here, which, if I remember right, came from Aaron's shield.
Some of America's founders were well-versed in Hebrew as well. James Madison and Alexander
Hamilton spoke fluent Hebrew in the United States, as well as others. And as a matter of fact, he didn't mention it here. However, in valedictorian speeches way back when, people who were not Jewish delivered them in Hebrew in America.
Alexander Hamilton chief among them. In 1783, secular Jewish intellectuals, part of the Jewish Enlightenment movement known as the Haskalah, started a Hebrew language periodical called HaMe'asef. Their goal was to spread the language and demonstrate its beauty. By publishing Hebrew language newspapers distributed to tens of thousands, they furthered a new Hebrew style closely tied to the vernacular and very different from old school rabbinic Hebrew. So while this new Hebrew 2.0 was still mainly literary, it was now used to write about all sorts of mundane things, not just the Bible. Okay, enough about reading and writing Hebrew. When and how did Hebrew actually become a spoken language? Well, in the late 19th century, the Zionist movement began to take shape, and amongst cultural Zionists, as opposed.
So before the answer is revealed, what language do you think Theodor Herzl recommended Jews to speak? Anybody want to take a guess?
Yiddish?
Yiddish? All right, everybody for Yiddish, watch this.
Opposed to Theodor Herzl's more political Zionism, Hebrew was a way to return to their ancient Jewish roots. But modern Hebrew still faced some major hurdles. One of them was Yiddish. Yiddish wasn't just the spoken language of most European Jews, it was their mother tongue, their way of life. The Hebrew pioneers themselves didn't start off speaking Hebrew. Imagine these Yiddish speakers struggling to use a language in their daily life that must have sounded terribly formal and stilted. It'd be like trying to order a pizza in Latin. And there were more than a fair share of Zionist leaders who didn't have much faith in the resurrection of Hebrew. Moshe Lilienblum, a pre-Herzl Zionist leader, actually said Hebrew's time was up. Herzl himself even thought.
Look at that. See what it says? Herzl himself even thought German
was the natural choice for Zionism. After all, he said, who knows enough Hebrew to buy a train ticket? And
so what that says is that if it was up to Theodor Herzl, German would be the language of the Jews. Did you know that?
And of course, there were the Ashkenazi Orthodox Jews, many of them Hasidim, who still held firm in their belief that Hebrew should only be used for holy topics like Torah study and prayer. Even more so, now that modern Hebrew had become associated with secularism and Zionism, things they were not huge fans of. So, all in all, the opportunity to revive spoken Hebrew seemed quite slim. And then there's Eliezer ben Yehuda. Born Eliezer Yitzchak Perelman, he believed the future of the Jews required both their own land and their own language. And Hebrew was the way to unite Jews across the globe. Eliezer's obsession with Hebrew started as a child in Europe, when his yeshiva teacher secretly introduced him to secular Hebrew literature, such as the works of Achad Ha'am, a leader of the cultural Zionist movement we spoke about earlier. Eliezer also discovered that in rare cases, when two Jewish communities that spoke different languages, say Yiddish and Arabic, needed to correspond with each other, they would sometimes use a form of medieval Hebrew as a common language. This strengthened his resolve, and in 1881, he packed his bags and made the trek to Palestine.
So as the story goes on, you'll learn about this one man who had a vision and a dream to make Hebrew the spoken language. And up to that point, there was not one household of Jewish people who spoke Hebrew. Not one in the entire world.
Adopting the biblical sounding name Eliezer ben Yehuda, he and his wife established the world's first strictly speaking Hebrew household in almost 2,000 years, and soon produced the world's first native Hebrew speaker in almost 2,000 years, their son, Ben Sion. Now, it's easy to criticize how Ben Yehuda raised Ben Sion in a home that spoke a language no one else was using, but sometimes it takes a little bit of crazy to create profound change. The experiment got off to a rough start. By the age of 4, Ben Sion still wasn't talking, and Ben Yehuda was so obsessed with proving that Hebrew could exist as a modern daily language, he actually prevented Ben Sion from playing with other kids to avoid any corruption of his Hebrew.
So do you think he was being a fair father by doing that?
I don't think so.
Nope.
Turned out to
Sion
be
later wrote that his
I'm sorry, what, Marty?
turned out to be a great move.
Yeah. Can you imagine the guy's chutzpah, though, for doing something
Really?
like that?
Yeah.
father
Yeah,
wouldn't let him listen to the chirping of birds or the neighing of horses, since they didn't do it in Hebrew. Maybe an exaggeration, but Ben Yehuda wasn't messing around. Ben Yehuda's friends and colleagues were telling him to give up, but suddenly the kid's first word finally came: Abba, Daddy. Ben Yehuda wrote in his diary that there was now no room for doubt that Hebrew could become the spoken language of a community. But how do you...
Just because his kid said 2 words, this guy says, there it is. Every Jew's going to talk Hebrew.
What
Hey,
an optimist.
yeah, yeah. There might be a lesson to learn.
You make this change happen. Ben Yehuda believed the key was to use it as the language of instruction in schools. Hebrew wouldn't just be a subject studied, it would be the language used to teach all other subjects like math and history. The first all-Hebrew elementary school was founded in 1899, and within 10 years, the number of all-Hebrew schools grew to 20, with 2,500 students. Ben Yehuda argued that Hebrew would become a living language by moving from the schools into the home, and his work convinced many secular nationalist Jews of the same thing. In 1890, Ben Yehuda founded the Vad HaLashon, or the Language Council, which still exists to this day as the Academy of the Hebrew Language. The council published bulletins and dictionaries, coining thousands of words you don't find in the Torah, like doll, ice cream, and bicycle. Not every word he invented caught on, but Ben Yehuda took it upon himself to keep the language growing. Like we mentioned earlier, Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, initially preferred German to Hebrew as the language for Israel. But he soon reversed his position, even embracing Hebrew while embarrassed that he could not speak it. After his...
So before I pause, I'm going to go on. I'm going to ask you this question. When do you think the first Hebrew dictionary was published? Anybody want to take a guess?
The 1900s?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, okay.
That's a safe answer. Can anybody want to try and narrow it down?
death, the Zionist Congress officially declared Hebrew the language of Zionism. The language spread through schools and homes in Israel and developed through trial and error. But Eliezer ben Yehuda had achieved his goal. Shortly before ben Yehuda died in 1922, Britain officially recognized Hebrew as the language of Palestine's Jewish inhabitants. 26 years later, Israel became an official Hebrew-speaking state.
So 1922, right? Plus 26 is 1948.
But just like the story didn't begin with ben Yehuda, it certainly doesn't end there either. He became the face of the movement, but there was still a lot of work to be done. While ben Yehuda invented about 150 words, his son Ben Zion and others came up with thousands more. In fact, the first Hebrew dictionary wasn't completed until 1959.
1959
Wow.
was the first dictionary.
Wow.
11 years after Israel was founded. And just think about the fields of medicine, science, and law. Entire dictionaries needed to be written to cover new concepts that hadn't even existed when the Bible was written. Men like Dr. Aaron Meir Mazia took on the task of advising ben Yehuda during his life and continued his work after his death. By the time of Israel's establishment, over 90% of Israeli kids under 15 were already fluent in Hebrew. With refugees pouring in from all over the world at that time, the need for a common language was front and center. Hebrew was still battling Yiddish as a popular language, but many in Israel's booming immigrant population considered Yiddish a language of exile and a reminder of things they'd rather forget. With the new state founded, Israeli leaders wanted to cement Israeli identity, and they knew Hebrew was a key ingredient needed to bond them all together. Ben-Gurion went so far as suppressing Yiddish from being used in any public role, using a well-organized political system to force Hebrew usage through its comprehensive services to the immigrant masses. Schools were in Hebrew, youth movements were in Hebrew, compulsory military service was in Hebrew, political leaders Hebraicized their names. David Gruen became David Ben-Gurion, Golda Meyerson became Golda Meir, and thus Hebrew as a language finally won. So it would seem like Eliezer ben Yehuda was responsible in many ways for reviving and modernizing Hebrew. But it took an entire people over many centuries to ensure that he would be able to accomplish this feat. So while we usually credit ben Yehuda with single-handedly bringing Hebrew back to life, it's really more complicated than that. As Zionist leader Menachem Usishkin later said of ben Yehuda, the people needed a hero, so we gave them one. Still, it was ben Yehuda who steered the language past the array of obstacles facing it in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Remember, not everyone wanted it to succeed. If Herzl had his way initially, Israelis would be speaking German. Doesn't sound right, does it? So, can your average American teenager read and understand a 300-year-old English manuscript without help? Unlikely. But any Hebrew speaker can open up a 3,000-year-old Hebrew text and make sense of it, religious or not. Hebrew's rebirth returned a common language to an ancient people, and its revival also helped lead to the miracle of Israel's rebirth. Jews now have both a land and a language, just as ben Yehuda envisioned. Thanks for watching. See you guys.
So, what do you think?
Quite informative.
Huh?
can I say something? When I was studying in Jerusalem at one point, they took us to the school, this building where Ben Eliezer was. You know, they showed us a film about him, and he was creating words and writing words, and they were like falling everywhere. And he wouldn't let, in his house, he wouldn't let his wife speak to his son at all in any other language. He was very, very adamant. It was a great film if you ever get a chance to use that one. But it was amazing, the revolution that it was created by bringing Hebrew into the modern language.
Right.
That it is.
Yeah. So,
Andy,
yes.
when and why did some of the words switch from when I went to Hebrew school? Some of them ended in S and now they're ending in T, like Shabbos is now Shabbat. Why did that happen?
Because
Go ahead, Alan.
the language that is spoken in Hebrew is Sephardic Hebrew. We learned Ashkenazi Hebrew. We learned MS.
Right.
Emet.
So I think Cantor Brody might, and many of us who daven might know, sometimes somebody says Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash, or some people say Yis Gadal v'Yis Kadash. And it's the same Hebrew letter, same vowels, but one is Ashkenazi, one is Sephardic. And the rule is, if you start it one way, you got to do it the entire way, and you can't mix it up. So you can't say Yit Gadal v'Yis Kadash. You have to do it the same way so you don't mix people up. Am I right, Cantor Brody?
More or less.
Okay, expand on it.
More or less.
Expand on it.
The problem really is that the accent should always be on the last syllable, whether you're doing Ashkenazic or Sephardic, Svardit, Ashkenazi. It should always be on the last syllable. For whatever reason, with the Yiddish always crept in. You know, somebody's saying Shabbos all day long, Moshe, Shabbos, David. When they go to pray, they have to almost change their whole idea. The only thing that really gets them to pronounce the words correctly is the Torah. Because when you read the Torah, you don't say Moshe. You don't say Moshe. You say Moshe. If you're davening, you might say Yismach Moshe, you know, because it was, so the Yiddish always crept into the pronunciation of for people.
Interesting.
And even today, Israelis, a word can be accented, the same word can be accented on the first syllable or the last syllable, depending on what's following it. Such as, V'natat, it should be V'natata Shalom, because Shalom is on the last syllable. It shouldn't be V'natata Shalom, which you hear everybody saying. It's wrong. So the wrong things become what? Traditional, kind of, or whatever, and they become acceptable.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that amendment. I appreciate that very, very much. So I presented this to my high school class, my Hebrew high school class at Temple Torah to make called HIP. And one student, actually two students, raised their hand, and I want to get your opinion on this. Two students raised their hand in all seriousness, and they said, Mr. Greenberg, this is wrong. A holy language that was used for the Torah to be used in spoken language for ice cream, which is glida, and so many other trivial words, is disrespectful of our original holy language. This was a high school kid, two of them actually, and they were not being funny or misbehaving. They were being passionate and serious. So I ask you, was she right, or was the Hebrew language developed for us to be used in the year 2020 and beyond, knowing that it started out as a Hebrew language? What sayeth you? Arthur?
My opinion is a living language, and that it is good that it can be used for day-to-day exchange of ideas and communication. So yes, it is a holy language, but it is a living and ever-changing language, and that's a strength. That would be my answer to the...
Jan and then Ruth?
I was going to say, you know, in Israel, in the Orthodox communities, they certainly feel this way. And that's why they continue to speak Yiddish. And you see even the little 3-year-olds speaking Yiddish because they don't think they can speak, you know, talk about glida in Ivrit. So.
All right, Ruth and then Mo.
Well, if you're going to have a language where people can make themselves understood and talk about various objects, you have to develop words for them. The fact that there was no word for ice cream in the Torah, there was no ice cream. Yeah, so you would have to have an entirely different language. So I understand the modern, not the modern, but the old Orthodox speak Yiddish because they don't believe Hebrew should be used that way. But I'm sure that the majority of Israeli people feel this is their living language. These children were born, and this is the language they learn at home, just as we learned English growing up. Their family speaks Hebrew. So there has to be a word for everything that they need to express.
Okay, Mo?
Well, I just related to the King's English. That evolved. So why shouldn't that language evolve?
Okay, yes. However, the King's English, was that a spiritual, holy language?
Well, if you talk to my neighbor back in Massachusetts, it was.
Interesting. Okay, go ahead, Lynn.
I think it's important, what they said earlier, to have a language and for the culture, to have one language to unite everybody. And I think that it makes sense that they'd have to use it for the Torah and for speaking.
Interesting. All right. Anyone else want to add to that discussion?
I think it's part of building a stronger country. I think
Yes.
in the growth of Israel, that this fact that everybody coming from all these countries had to learn to speak one common language related to our ancient language, and it's such a beautiful thing that we can all speak that language and, you know, build Eretz Yisrael that way.
So here's an amazing story. Again, from my high school kids, I ask them occasionally once a year, and of course they evolve because we have kids that graduate, new kids that come in, and I ask them and I say, what is it that you missed in Hebrew school before you enrolled in the HIP program? What is it that you wish we would have taught you more? And what do you think some of the answers are?
Spoken Hebrew.
Conversational Hebrew.
Number one answer, year after year after year, is we wish we knew how to speak conversational Hebrew. Shocking. So I'll share a little personal story with you, and then we'll move on to a different one. So when I was younger, I knew conversational Hebrew up and down. I could talk to anybody. But of course, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I'm certainly not as proficient as I used to be. A prayer book Hebrew, Torah Hebrew, yeah, but conversational, I need remedial courses. So when I knew the language, I think when I was about 31 years old, Carol, my wife, and I went on a trip to Israel with a group under 40. It was a 3-week trip, and there were single girls and married couples. And we were on this tour bus for 3 weeks with a guide and the bus and the driver. And because Carol was hearing challenged, we always sat in front right by the guide so she could hear what's going on, and that was fine. All right. Now, for those of us that have been to Israel, you know how good looking the men can be. They are really look at Jan. Oh my gosh, what a reaction. They could be as good looking as the average Israeli woman who happens to be stunning, okay? So with that being said, 2 days into the trip, very nicely, very adult-like, without being disrespectful, the tour guide turns to the bus driver and says, "Do you see that girl sitting in the back?" And the bus driver, all in Hebrew, and said, "Yes." Said, "Why?" He said, "Well, she seduced me last night." Okay, it happens. It's okay. She's single. None of my business. I didn't go around telling rumors. And the trip was for 3 weeks. Every morning, there was a new conquest. And they were nice about it, okay? Now, in the entire trip, I never told them I spoke or knew Hebrew. Never. At the last day when we were giving out the gratuities, I
He
gave
speaks
him
it in
a
Hebrew.
gratuity. I thanked him in Hebrew and the whole language, the whole thing, how great they were. And I said, the most memorable thing are the stories you told every morning. And you know, they are naturally dark-skinned, and I never seen them turn so red in my life. So there is an advantage to knowing Hebrew. All right, let me go on to an entirely different topic. So this has to do with the history of Israel. So we all know that at the end of the Torah, the Jews crossed over, they went into Jericho, they conquered the land, and they had kingdoms and the whole 9 yards. And, God gave us these great laws to follow, worship, don't have idols, and get along with each other and the whole 9 yards. And how do you think that went?
Not good.
Not good.
Look, Jews don't like to be told what to do.
Oh, Jews don't like to be told what to do. So, Mark, when you say not good, so if things are not going good, what could happen when things don't go good?
Well, that's why they built the golden calf.
Yeah, that golden calf, right? And the golden calf was only one event, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
The golden calf only occurred once in Jewish history?
To my knowledge, I can't answer that question. To my knowledge, I believe so, but I'm not 300% positive.
Okay, everybody
No, there was other cases where the Jews turned to idol worshiping. Whether it was a golden calf or not, I can't answer. But there were other cases that they turned to idol worshiping before David became king.
Uh-huh. All right, not after. Okay, well, let's find out what the real truth is, and let's begin to think about it. And here we go. This one's fun. 12 minutes. I'll get the sound.
Nobility, justice, and holiness. The Jewish equivalent of King Arthur's Camelot spliced with the Vatican. Take, for instance...
This is when they first came to Israel. Afterwards.
War, idolatry, murdering of prophets, civil war.
By the way, when she talks about murdering of prophets, who do you think murdered the prophets?
Okay, maybe the legendary Jewish kingdom did have some problems. How did what was once supposed to be the divinely gifted Jewish nation fall apart? So, after Moses died, the Jewish people conquer and then settle the land of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua. The Jews officially become Israelites with their newfound residents and divide up the land by tribe. There's Asher and Naphtali in the north, Dan, Benjamin, and Judah in the south. Menashe and Gad found a...
Doesn't that look like the map of the 13 colonies after the Americans began to colonize? Huh, wonder where they got that idea from.
Plush piece of land on the east side of the Jordan and decided to settle outside the borders of the kingdom. Point is, everybody kind of just keeps to themselves for a while. Not a bad thing. Just a loose confederation of states, if you will. Not too much central leadership except for the judges, not the black robe and gavel type of judge, but spiritual leaders who arose to whip the Jews back into shape when they got lax and maybe led a war here and there. Now that was by design, a system to maximize personal responsibility and empower the individual. Idealistic, utopian, truly a freedom worth cherishing. But then the Jewish people say, you know what would be nice? To be ruled by a king. I guess they were looking around and they saw all their neighbors with their frou-frou and their crowns and their glorious robes, and they thought, I want a piece of that. So, the prophet Samuel anoints an Israelite named Saul, and he's good, reigning for about 2 years or 20, depending on whether you're going by the Bible or the historian's guesstimate. But who's counting? Saul is succeeded by King David, who loves bullying overgrown barbarians and writing poetry. This brings us to Solomon, the wisest of all men, who according to Jewish tradition is the author of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs, inventor of the infant bisecting maternity test.
Everybody's familiar with the bisecting maternity test?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And most notably, the builder of Solomon's temple. Imagine the elegance of Buckingham Palace, the beauty of the Sistine Chapel, and the magnitude of the pyramids, with shorter lines than Disney World. Yes, Israel finally had its wonder of the world, where the priests conducted the daily sacrifices and drew the presence of God onto the earth. It was King Solomon's crowning achievement. But it wasn't cheap. That's okay. We'll let the next guy worry about the budget deficit.
Budget deficits in those days? Oh my gosh, does that remind us of current times? But wait, it gets worse.
Enter the next guy, Rehoboam. Solomon's son, King Rehoboam, ascends the throne, and right off the bat, he gets hit with complaints from the 10 northern tribes. See, in order to build that temple, Solomon had to raise taxes and enforce labor. But now that the temple was complete, the 10 northern tribes didn't think it was unreasonable to ask for a tax cut.
It's like those of us who live in an HOA and we're saying, hey, the HOA didn't spend any money this year. We want a reduction in our fees.
Right.
Rehoboam consulted his advisors. Now, he has 2 sets of counsel. There's the old, wizened, and weathered elders who served his father. Their suggestion, ease up and speak to them gently, and they will be your servants forever. Or he could listen to his young, upstart advisors who felt he should show them who's boss.
Which one do you think he went with, the elders or the young ones?
Young ones.
Guess which one he chose. Rehoboam comes down hard, proclaiming, quote, "My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions." So the northern tribes Brexit, forming the northern kingdom of Israel. One of Solomon's former ministers, Jeroboam, receives a prophecy that he, not Rehoboam, would be the next king. Having led the Israelites in asking for the reduced tax burden, he takes up the charge to rebel and becomes king of the north. Meanwhile, Rehoboam is left with the southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, known as...
Doesn't that look like the American Civil War, North versus the South, but in this case for different reasons? And in this case, Jew versus Jew.
...as the kingdom of Judah. So if Saul was anointed in 879 BCE and Rehoboam got his shot at kingship in 796, it took less than a century for 4 kings to screw up the country. So, did the trial separation help? No, not at all. On a religious level, they both falter. In the north, Jeroboam doesn't like that Judah has the temple. So, Jeroboam makes his own temple. Actually, 2 of them. One in the tribe of Dan and one in Bethel. But he decides to go a little off-brand, choosing for his mascot the golden calf.
Whoa! Look at that guy. Wow. Centuries later, we're back to the golden calf.
Word of advice. When you're trying to make a name for yourself, don't pick your nation's all-time biggest failure. In the south, Rehoboam is doing much better. He has about 17 years where he forsakes Bible law and suffers attacks from the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. Oh, and all the alliances that have been built with surrounding countries, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, they're out. Following the split are a cascade of reigning kings, all with varying degrees of success, scandals, overthrows, and wars.
How do you think they got one king? Why was there such a succession of kings? Anybody want to take a guess?
Repeat the question, Andy.
Sure. Why was there such a rapid succession of kings?
Nobody could have worked
out.
Watch this.
In the north, Jeroboam dies and his son takes over, but then he's killed by one of his army officers. They go through a few more reigns as one military commander kills the king, assumes the throne, and then is killed by another army.
They were assassinated.
Usurp, rinse, repeat. We land on Omri in 884, who's an effective ruler, increasing trade and commerce, and even ambitiously builds a Jerusalem of the North, Samaria, with not a temple, but a glorious citadel, making it his new capital.
It sounds like his theme was Israel first.
But possibly his most famous act is marrying off his son Ahab to the Phoenician princess Jezebel. We'll come back to this. Back in the south, it's pretty much the same sort of marching monarch conga line. Eventually, a man named Asa assumes the throne in the south, and rather than murder or war his way to securing power, he makes the country pull a spiritual 180, ridding the southern kingdom of idols. He even takes his grandmother's. That's courage. So, Asa is one of the few kings the Bible actually praises. But does that help him in his continual wars against the north? Not really, as the northern kingdom's troops actually come as close as 5 miles from taking Jerusalem. And
let's pause for a moment and understand the gravity of the situation. The Israeli army, made up of Jews, attacks the Jewish area of Judah, made up of Jews, and come within 5 miles of Jerusalem, almost like the Israeli army years back came within miles of Damascus.
Something happened to my connection.
and Asa is forced to turn to Damascus for help, offering gold and silver from the temple and his own palace. King Ben-Hadad I attacks from around Damascus, what today would be known as Syria, forcing the north to retreat in crushing defeat. The whole Jewish civil war jumps the shark when Ahab and Jezebel are confronted by the prophet Elijah for their appalling institutionalization of idolatry throughout Israel. The Book of Kings even goes so far as to call Ahab the worst king thus far. These names may sound familiar, as all three have persisted in Jewish and popular culture. Ahab is the main character of Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and an obscure X-Men villain. But fiction can't compare to fact in the magnitude of evil, as he and his wife rounded up and murdered over 300 Jewish prophets.
You see who killed the 300 Jewish prophets? It wasn't the enemy.
And brought idolatry back to the land. As wicked as Ahab was, Jezebel was the ringleader. She despised the tenets of Judaism and wished to wipe out God from the kingdom of Israel once and for all. In addition to the prophet purge, she framed a law-abiding landowner, executing him to seize his land. She incited her husband to build an altar to the Canaanite god Baal in the Sumerian capital, and had him bring in 450 priests to the pagan deity Baal, and another 400 to the pagan god Asherah. So on the evil scale of that food critic from Ratatouille to Thanos, she's somewhere between Maleficent and the guy who came up with alternate side parking tickets.
So I'm going to pause for a minute and ask, what do you think so far?
We have a checkered past.
Okay, but how about the whole concept of Judaism built around one God? The Jews have their Israel, and the northern part all of a sudden has idols, and Jewish people attack other Jewish people, and they disregard the Torah and all Jewish laws. What do you think about that?
It's not so much different today because the Orthodox don't consider us as being Jews.
Oh, okay. But wait a minute, Mark. You know as well as I do that when the Reform consider the Orthodox fanatics. So it goes both ways. So we always talk about what the Orthodox think of us, but we very seldom say what those of us who are not Orthodox, how we have a tendency, not we here, but in general, how we have a tendency to criticize the Orthodox for believing in their biblical roots and Torah and Mishnah and Talmud and everything else, and that they're crazy for following all these Meshuggah rules. So it goes both ways. Lynn. You got to unmute. Lynn, you have to unmute.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, did you want to say something?
No, that's okay.
All right. I thought you were going to say something. All right. Anybody else want to add before we continue? Is this mostly new information for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. All right, here we go. Yeah, where's my button?
The Jewish equivalent of the whole Jewish civil war jumps the sharks of Judaism and wished to wipe out God from the pagan god Asherah tickets. Jezebel was the ultimate temptress, frequently referenced in pop culture to this day, in songs, movies, TV, and the self-proclaimed, supposedly feminist website, Jezebel.com. When the prophet Elijah first confronts the duo, he foretells of a 2-year drought, which indeed comes to pass, plaguing the land. As he labors to hide the few remaining prophets, Ahab and Jezebel only grow more wrathful, refusing to repent. After 3 years, Elijah has had enough and proposes a showdown.
This is going to get dramatic. Anybody know this story? This is going to get dramatic.
Age? Mount Carmel. The audience? All the Jews of Israel. Challenge. The 450 priests of Baal would make an offering on their altar, while Elijah alone would make an offering to the Jewish God. No fire, no burning incense. Whoever's God comes down from heaven and consumes the offering first would be the winner. The priests of Baal set up their altar and beseech their God for the better part of an afternoon, while Elijah waits, cool, calm, and collected. The priests grow desperate, screaming to their God and even cutting themselves, hoping the blood and affliction would rouse their sleeping deity, but no response. Elijah then begins to mock. Shout louder! Maybe your God is chatting with his other God friends. Maybe he stepped out for a coffee. Maybe he's having a godly afternoon nap. I'm paraphrasing. When the priests give up, Elijah confidently douses water in his offering, not once, not twice, but thrice, and even has a ditch full of more water dug to stifle any possible flame that might ignite his sacrifice from the ground level. This guy knows how to put on a performance. Then, in front of the massive crowd, Elijah prays to the God of the Jewish people. Within seconds, a pillar of fire shoots down from the heavens, consuming the offering, the pyre, the stone altar, and even the moat of water. The audience immediately cheered praises to God, chanting, "The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God."
Anybody recognize those words, the Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God?
Yeah.
By Israel.
Well, then I'm not sure.
It's at the end of the high holidays. At the
That's
very end
it,
of the high
right
holidays.
there. That's right. It's the concluding part of the Ne'ilah service right at the end. Now we know where that came from.
With the nation again on his side, Elijah has all the prophets of Baal rounded up and executed. You'd think at this point the tides would turn and a wave of repentance would overwhelm the nation. But miracles hit people on an emotional level, and often, as soon as the emotion dissipates, so does that person's resolve. This is how Jezebel is able to watch Elijah's victory and respond, "So may the gods do to you as you have done to my priests, and so this time tomorrow I will make your life like the life of one of them." Basically, she's saying she's going to kill him. And Elijah knows in a couple of days, the Jews aren't really going to care.
Now, if you want to see something gory, if you don't want to see something gory or hear something gory, lower your volume, because the way this lady leaves this earth is shocking.
So Elijah hightails it out of Dodge and goes into hiding once again. He names Elisha as the new top prophet and then appoints Jehu as the new successor and rightful heir to the throne. It's not long before Elijah dies. I use air quotes because many of the great rabbis in the Talmud believe he didn't actually die. The Book of Kings relates the story that one day, while walking with Elisha, a firestorm swirls around the two and a chariot of fire gallops down, welcoming Elijah aboard, on which he ascends to heaven. But like Loki, Jon Snow, or Wade Wilson, Elijah just won't stay dead. As a big part of rabbinic tradition, it's believed that Elijah still wanders the earth, helping those in need and attending every boy's circumcision. And when the Messiah comes, he will be the one to announce it. Not a bad gig for calling out an evil queen. In 853 BCE, while facing the mounting threat of the Assyrians, Ahab dies in battle. Amidst the chaos, Jehu, still glistening from Elijah's anointing oils, makes his claim to the throne of the north. First, he slays Ahab's son Jehoram with a well-aimed arrow to the heart, then sets his sights on Queen Jezebel.
Here it comes.
Despite her grief, Jezebel doesn't flee. She does her hair and gets made up all prim and proper as she overlooks the encroaching monarch. Was she trying to seduce the murderer of her son? Or did she just want to die with dignity and in fashion? Hard to say. But when Jehu arrives, she calls out for support from her most trusted and loyal eunuchs.
What do you think these eunuchs did with her when she called out and said, "Please save me"? Anybody want to take a guess what they did?
Ran away.
Watch.
Who toss her out the window. Then the horses trample on her corpse, and all but her hands, head, and feet get devoured by stray dogs, which Elijah totally called to be a prophecy a few chapters earlier. Jehu eradicates Baal from all of Israel, as well as those golden calves of Bethel and Dan. Though Jehu's actions were righteous according to the Bible, his kingdom would have trouble fighting off King Shalmaneser III of Assyria and Hazael, king of Aram. The kingdoms drag on for a few more reigns, but it isn't long before the northern kingdom was decimated piece by piece, and the southern kingdom was conquered, leading to the first exile in 422 BCE. Unity has always been a bit tricky for the independent-minded Jewish people, whether wandering through the desert or
That's what Alan said.
Debating politics of modern Israel. Or as Golda Meir put it so plainly to Richard Nixon, "You are the president of 150 million Americans. I am the prime minister of 6 million prime ministers." They had a great moment of utopian unity at Mount Sinai, but within 40 days they had already had the golden calf debacle. Perhaps that explains the prophecy of Ezekiel that the nation's true long-term unity will only happen at the end of days. But despite the upheaval, the Jewish people of the great kingdoms of Judah and Israel never completely lost their bonds to their culture, history, pride, and a return to religious fidelity, even if it had to come about through exile. But you'll have to catch the next video for that.
All right. Now that we've completed that part of the story, give me some reactions, as this apparently is new information for most of us. So my first question is, are you glad you know this, or are you better off not knowing it?
Well, why shouldn't you know history?
It's history. Why not?
All right. So anybody else? You glad you know it? Arthur, you glad you now know this stuff? He's frozen. I can't hear. Marty, what about you? You glad you now know this?
No, and it just shows that just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you live peaceably with your Jewish neighbor.
Okay, all right.
We have a history of contention.
In telling the story, there's obviously a great deal of violence in our history.
Yeah.
A great deal of violence.
You bet.
Yeah.
So should the Jewish world have been perfect? What do I mean by that? So should the Jews have, after traveling for 40 years, after being slaves in the whole story, get to Israel and live calm and peacefully within a land of milk and honey, with everybody getting along and the Jewish religion being practiced? Should that have happened?
Would have been nice.
That's the way it should have.
It would have been nice, but.
Well, it did at the beginning because this was X amount of years after the escape from Egypt.
Yeah. And by the way,
years they lived prosperous. I mean, through Solomon, and it was after Solomon that all of this happened.
Oh, so what you're saying, Mark, is that as a result of the building of the temple, where the taxation became issues and labor became issues, it was the building of the temple that began the long-term downfall
Deficit
of the unity of the Jewish people.
Taxation without representation.
Wow. So are we saying that we should not have built the temple because the temple is the focal point of all this service?
Well, it caused poverty and it caused hardship among many of the Jewish people because they couldn't afford the taxes to pay the deficit, which we're now faced, and our children are going to be faced in years from now.
So you're making a case for the fact that Solomon might not have been that wise.
Okay.
Well, he built the temple for his own ego.
Oh, now wait. Well, if he built it for his own ego, he probably would have called it like, and I don't mean to be political, just funny. He didn't call it Solomon's Towers like Trump Towers. So
Solomon's Temple.
Yeah, but we don't. Yeah, but I don't think it's referred to a lot when we say that. We say First Temple and Second Temple, so it might have lost its brand or something.
David wanted to build the temple.
I'm sorry. One more time, Alan.
David wanted to build the temple.
Yeah, but did he?
God said you have blood on your hands. You can't build the temple. That's why he was school anyway.
All right. Yep. So did Solomon do the right thing, or long term, because of his either ego or devotion to the religion, either one, you pick it, that seemed to have caused the downfall of what was occurring?
That caused a major split between the North and the South.
Yes, it did. Carolyn, what do you think about this dilemma? And then Jan, what do you think about this dilemma? Would he be better off not building it?
Probably.
Ooh, Jan, what do you think?
Well, look at the cop. Look
You,
at all the.
you don't know when you set out to build something. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. You set out with the best of intentions, and then stuff happens. So I wouldn't fault Solomon on that. That's what I would say.
Okay.
You don't know what's going to happen.
All right. So all the service, all the killing, all the things. But here's what really came out of it, which long term was the right thing for Solomon to do, because when you had that showdown, right? Mm-hmm. According to biblical history and in the Nevi'im and in the Book of Kings and all that, whatever book it was in, there it is. He was right that God came down and showed himself. And if it wasn't for all the misery, that probably would not have happened. And that kind of presents us with some issues today, doesn't it? People always say, where's God? I want to see God. All right. We all understand that. But remember this, God only performs miracles of unbelievable proportions when we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So do we want to be in trouble to see God, which is kind of what the part of the issue there was too. Mark?
We had 6 million plus that died. That's trouble. God didn't come down.
Well, you bring up a good point, and about, I don't know, last year, for those that were in class last year, when that question came up, I had an answer. It doesn't mean it's the right answer, okay? And you can tell me I'm full of malarkey, and I'll accept that. But I came up with a crazy way to answer that question. The original decree by the Germans was to wipe out every Jew. And every Jew was not wiped out. It's a pity that 6 million were. And there's no pity is not even the right word. It's a Holocaust that 6 million were. But the final decree was not carried out to its full executable plan. So one can or cannot say, depending upon what point of view is that maybe there was divine intervention from stopping the entire eradication of the Jewish people, or not.
Couldn't he have come down earlier? After
Could have, coulda, woulda, shoulda, who knows? But, you know, one can always, and I'm not defending the action, so please don't think that I'm defending in any way the Holocaust, and please don't think any way that I'm defending that God not coming earlier, if in fact he came at all, because I want to go both ways on it. However, with that being said, after the Holocaust, and I'm not the first one to say this, what was one of the outcomes? Israel. Does that mean the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means, whatever the expression is? That's beyond thinkers, well beyond my ability or pay scale. But when you take a look at Jewish history, regrettably, bad things happen, and then better things occur. Would you and I endorse that? I don't. But that is a reflection of history. There's no excuse for 6 million Jews being killed. I got that. But there were 6 million plus that weren't, and Israel came out of that, and Judaism benefited. Yet, as someone else pointed out a few moments ago, we Jews, we are not unified. We still are diverse and apart, and that goes on, which leaves us again open for additional internal and external attacks. Yeah. Other input. I don't want to be the only one blabbing. Other input. Tough questions. Yeah, Dave Cantor, please.
Well, Solomon built a temple because it was commanded basically from the commandments and what God wanted, supposedly a temple, that they had the tabernacle and they were going to build a temple. Mm-hmm. So he did it because it was going to unify the people would get closer to God. That was the whole idea with sacrifices and everything, to become closer to God and to do godly things. So the intent, that was the intention. Now, it doesn't work out that way, obviously, but you have to have the intention of doing good. And there's good, and then there's not so good. And that makes you appreciate, obviously, in your own lives, in everybody's life, that everything can't be perfect all the time.
Right.
There's no such thing. So history, the Jewish history is no different than the American history, no different than anybody else. We're people. And people act like people, so to speak. Like Yogi Berra would say, people are people.
People are people.
Human
nature. Thank you. So the reason for me bringing up the earlier part, did Solomon do the right thing, was just to provoke discussion. Not to say I suggested that Solomon didn't, but I wanted to get some perspective as to the outcomes based on good intentions, as Jan mentioned. I'd like to get your permission to do something. I've got one more I want to show you, if it's okay, if we're a little bit late before we end. I want to end on a positive note, if it's okay with everybody.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So on a positive note, so I want to talk about the city of Tel Aviv. We talked about how Israel destroyed itself to a point. Now I want to talk about how Israel built itself. And I don't know how many of us know the history of how Tel Aviv got to the extent where it is. And I want to end this on a positive note.
If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on.
Let me show you this one.
You want to come back, come back.
And this one is only 7 minutes, but it's kind of cool.
financial center, bursting with startups and headquarters of major global companies. Or you may know of it as a cosmopolitan hub of culture and art. Or you may just know it as the party capital of the Middle East. So how did a pile of sand dunes transform into the modern city of Tel Aviv we know today? The year was 1909, and the place was just north of the ancient city of Jaffa, a port that had existed for millennia and had changed hands between the Jews, Arabs, Crusaders, Turks, and other groups over the years. Jewish pioneers fleeing persecution and hardship in Europe purchased deeds for roughly 12 acres of barren sand dunes from the Ottoman Empire with the intent of creating the first modern Jewish city. Hoping to expand Jaffa and start a new and better life there, they founded the town of Tel Aviv. The name itself meant Hill of Spring in Biblical Hebrew. It was also the title of the Hebrew translation of the utopian novel Alt Neuland, or Old New Land, written by Zionist leader Theodor Herzl. On that day, April 11th, 1909, 66 families arrived on the shore of the future city. But
66 families started Tel Aviv, and if you don't know how they divided up the land, you'll be shocked.
Needed a fair method of divvying up the plots of land among them. Siva Arya Weiss, the president of the building cooperative they all belonged to, came up with the idea of a seashell lottery. He plucked 66 gray seashells and 66 white ones from the sand beneath their feet. He carefully wrote the name of each family on a white shell and a number for a plot of land on each gray one. A 10-year-old boy paired them up at random and doled them out. The land was assigned, and Tel Aviv was born.
Well, there you go. That's the way to do it.
Very fair.
How did it transform from sand to city? Enter Sir Patrick Geddes from Scotland, one of the founding fathers of urban planning. With the United Kingdom in control of Mandatory Palestine, Geddes took an active interest in the development of the region. He had already designed the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1919, and in 1925, he had some fresh new ideas about how to construct the city. His design envisioned a garden city that laid out main roads intersecting with smaller side streets to create roomy residential blocks with lots of greenery and a communal garden in the center of each. This would combine a modern organized city with an open pastoral feel. Soon, the rapid development of the city would largely overwhelm his plan, although the layout Geddes designed can still be seen on the road plan today. Interest in moving to Tel Aviv caught on quickly, and the town swelled from a population of 2,000 in 1920 to over 40,000 by the end of the decade. That's an increase of 2,000%. And in the 1930s, the city really passed over the threshold of becoming a major city. Jewish refugees fleeing new waves of persecution in Europe landed in Tel Aviv, and the town's population skyrocketed. With this influx of immigrants came culture, sport, and industry. Habima Theater Company was founded in Russia in 1917, but fled anti-Semitic persecution and moved to Tel Aviv in 1931, where it later became Israel's national theater. In 1932, the first Maccabiah Games were held, an international Jewish sports competition aiming to shatter stereotypes about weak Jews. Tel Avivians proudly showcased the athletic and muscular new Jew.
And for those that are not familiar, the Maccabi Games are still ongoing, where every state, every Jewish community has local competitive sports, and then you go through the ranks, and if you make it to Israel, you go to the international Maccabi.
Furthering the city's patriotic feel, 1936 inaugurated the first performance of the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra with a rendition of Hatikva, the national anthem. And when the 1936 Arab Revolt cut Tel Aviv off from the port city of Jaffa in the late 30s, the city showed its persevering spirit, sending its first shipment of homegrown oranges to England's Buckingham Palace as a message that Zionism was still going strong. By now, the mid-30s, Tel Aviv had become a rapidly expanding city of over 130,000 people. The layout of the city also expanded. Architects educated in the ultra-modernist German Bauhaus style moved to the city and gave the city its famous international look. They designed buildings that favored clean curves and lines without embellishments and focused on practicality, which made sense for a new and rapidly expanding city being built on a practically blank slate. Back in Germany, the Nazi regime classified this style as degenerate art and shut down the Bauhaus school. And because so many Jewish architects fled Nazi Germany for Tel Aviv, the city came to host the largest Bauhaus district in the world, with over 4,000 buildings in this style. The Bauhaus district came to be known as Tel Aviv's White City and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. All this new development helped to put Tel Aviv on the world map. The city continued to grow economically as well. In 1953, the Israeli Stock Exchange opened in Tel Aviv, establishing its role as the financial hub of the new state. Recently, Tel Aviv has been ranked in the top 25 most important financial centers in the world. Not bad for a city with a population of only 450,000. It's also a premier city for startup businesses. In 2012, it was named the second best city in which to found a startup, coming only after Silicon Valley. The number 5 spot on the 2019 Bloomberg Innovation Index, and the number 1 spot for research and development. The Israeli government encourages this creative spirit with the Israeli Innovation Authority, an agency that fosters invention in several industries. With so much business and development, it's the financial and international hub of Israel. Tel Aviv is also Israel's center of nightlife, entertainment, and, well, what you can really only call partying. On weekend nights, the city is lit up from the clubs in southern Tel Aviv to the crowded bars and sidewalks of Allenby, Ben Yehuda, and Dizengoff streets. The city's coastal location is a prime facet of its social life as well, with beaches so popular that Tel Aviv is nicknamed the Ibiza of the Middle East. But despite the booming industry and social scene, Tel Aviv has its fair share of economic concerns.
I'm going to stop here. And the purpose of me showing this again is, wow, when Jews work together, look at what can be accomplished. Because that Tel Aviv is an amazing, amazing city. And when you think about the year it started and where it is today, and it's the center of so many great things, innovation, it's utterly fantastic. So closing comments, what I wanted to do today was kind of go back and talk a little bit about Thanksgiving and fill in some things maybe we didn't know, and went through that quick. Really revealed how the Hebrew language, which I think was new to most of us, became the official language of Israel and the rebirth. And then, of course, talked about our past and all the infighting, and then ending up on a positive note, showing what Jewish people can do and how great of a country Israel is. So any closing comments or anything you'd like to add or say before we conclude? Go ahead, Cantor, please.
Well, the word for thanks is Todah and Yehuda and Judah, the whole idea that we give thanks and we're named thank you, basically. Our name.
Todah Rabbah.
That's the
I didn't know that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Thank you. Now we all learned something new. That's the beauty of the class. We can all learn from each other. That's fantastic. All right. So there's no closing comments. I'll see you next week. I'm just going to give you a bit of a preview about next week.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Great holiday, everyone.
Next week, I'm going to start off by showing you the hidden things in the Jewish Magen David. And we'll just leave you on that, so you'll come back next week, plus many more other interesting things. So happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay Jewish.
You too. You too.
And let me know if you're coming back.
Thanksgiving
Mark,
to
let me know
everybody.
if Mark, let me know if you and your wife are coming back next year. Send me an email. Yes or no, I need to know. And I think Marty, I heard from. Ruth, I heard from. Arthur, I heard from. Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Laila Tov.
Laila.